I am co-chair with Dan on the Professional Development Committee, so it's a little strange to be on this side of things as a speaker today. But I am the principal at Full Circle Fundraising, so I help support nonprofits and government agencies in their fundraising and marketing needs and strategic planning as well. So thank you everybody for coming. I have some funny stories to share, so can't wait to do that.
And that is why you are where you are. And of course, our dear friend, Daniel Blain.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Daniel Blain. I'm the VP of Advancement at NEOMED, which is Northeast Ohio Medical University. And we're down the street from U of A and YSU and Stark State. So it's good to see lots of people from the neighborhood. Happy to be here.
Again, thank you to you all for agreeing to join us and share some of your hard-won lessons and wisdom on difficult donor conversations. So we will jump right in. The first question, can you share a story of a difficult donor conversation that didn't go so well? I won't pick any one of you to go first. I'll see who wants to jump in with one of those exciting stories.
I'll jump in. I'll take the bullet. I'll go first. So lessons hard learned, right? So didn't go so well. The story is a little bit of a long one, so I'll say I was the director of community engagement at a large nonprofit that served multiple programs in multiple counties, and it merged with a one program nonprofit in a 2-county service area. And excellent merger. Everything really went well in terms of operations and branding and name changing and all that. The smaller nonprofit had a major fundraising event that had been very successful. And so our attitude was really, let's just not rock the boat. Let's not change anything. We spent 6 months communicating about all the positives about the merger, had great press coverage. We were really excited. Things seemed to be going really well. And when the major fundraising event came to start the process of gathering together previous committee members and maybe inviting some new committee members in from the other organizations, we hit a wall, and about a third of the committee members showed up. And I was left facing a group of volunteers that were not happy and had a lot of concerns, and they needed face-to-face interaction with the other organization that had merged with them. So that meeting wasn't about the fundraising event. That meeting was about repairing relationships and really providing, a conversation about soothing ruffled feathers, and finding out that the other 2/3 of the committee that didn't show up had the same feelings, and were going to be even harder, I think, to convince. So we really enlisted those volunteers to help us build back some broken relationships with those volunteers. That was, of course, the first red flag that perhaps the communications for the merger did not go over well with the donors that were really kind of place-based donors, really tied to the mission. And the overall perception was that a large nonprofit gobbled up their small community nonprofit, and they didn't need to participate in fundraising anymore. They didn't need to give anymore, which of course was, you all know, not the truth, right? That's not the case at all. In fact, we needed more. So despite all of our direct emails, communications, newsletters, press releases, media coverage to talk about all the benefits of this, when you're so wrapped up in the operations of a merger, making sure that you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's, what we missed was the personal communications with the donors. They really wanted to hear from the executive team in person, on the phone, face-to-face, that their dollars were still going to have an impact in that community that they had previously supported, and it wasn't going to be spent outside of that community. And we missed it. We just completely, in the flurry of activity that happened, we assumed by not changing the event that we were asking them to sponsor, by keeping everything the same, maintaining the branding, sending out lots of letters and communications, it was enough, and it was not. And if hindsight were 20/20, I would have pushed aside a lot of the efforts in marketing that I was trying to do to get the communications out, and really sat down with the executive team and said, look, we need to start making some phone calls here. We need to set up some lunches. We need to set up some meetings with people. And this was back when you could meet in person. Oh, the good old days. And really smooth out some ruffled feathers for some donors. So what happened was it did not go well. There was a 60% loss in those previous sponsors. What we ended up doing was focusing on getting new donors in, and lowering costs for the event and cutting some overhead. It ended up only being about a 10 to 15% loss overall, because we did bring in new sponsors and we cut our expenses knowing that this was transpiring. And it was, a cautionary tale of when you're bringing on new donors like that, which not everyone's ever going to experience a nonprofit merger. Call me if you do, I'll coach you. But it was a cautionary tale of those donors need personal contact. They really do. They needed to be comforted and knowing that what they were supporting was still there. And it was, but the letters and the emails weren't enough. Any questions about that?
We'll see if either Daniel or Shirley want to jump in.
I'm happy to share actually a very recent and not yet fully resolved situation, but which cuts on many of the topics that I know we're going to talk about today. So our foundation recently changed its policy regarding how we take an administrative fee from endowed funds. It used to be a fee that was contingent on investment returns. And that way, if the market wasn't good, we didn't take the fee. And if the market was good, we did get the fee. And pretty much our donors, when we started that about 5 years ago, seemed fine with that. It was a very conservative and donor-friendly approach. It also is not a good approach in terms of funding or in terms of ensuring that you have what you need in a down market. So our leadership this year decided that we no longer can afford to do that, and changed to a straight administrative fee charged against all endowments, regardless of where the market was. And in doing that, we sat down and looked at all of our donors and made a list of the ones we wanted to be sure that we could call first before they received a letter from the foundation president announcing it, that we could give them heads ups. And we had one donor in particular who had an extremely adverse reaction to this, and in fact said if this is going to move forward, he's going to need to have his funds returned. So that's the issue. I'm happy to share where it's at in terms of resolution, because it ain't yet over. So he shared this information to us through a email to myself and to the president of the university. And I immediately went to the president of the university and said, this isn't good. We need to do something about this. And he was like, okay, go fix it. So my inclination was to say, no problem. We'll make sure that that the fee won't be administered against your funds. This was, by the way, after sharing the rationale and have him sharing back that he didn't care. So I, promised him that on behalf of the president, no issue, which made him happy. It, however, did not make happy my colleagues here in the fiscal area and in the legal area, and even my leadership of the foundation board. So that's probably enough for now. I'm happy to go a little deeper on that, but lots of lessons learned.
I look forward to updates on that one in the coming months. And we'll jump over to Shirley.
My story is similar to Don in that it has to do with the merger. When I joined the organization almost 3 years ago, one of the things I quickly learned working for an organization that has more than one local entity. So I'm here in Akron, but I work with donors in Toledo all the way over to Youngstown, is that Planned Parenthood had undergone a number of mergers. And so the last one was 2012 when we became one affiliate, Planned Parenthood of Greater Ohio, which is everything in terms of healthcare centers from Central Ohio, Northeast Ohio, and Northwest Ohio. And so I am calling donors to get to know them and make a connection and again, just build those relationships. And one donor, several of them were letting me know that they were disappointed with the volunteer groups that they had in their communities were disbanded. So when, say for instance, a group of donors or supporters in Toledo got together, there was there had been a formal name for that group, the Community Leaders Community Leaders, CLC. I don't remember what the other C stood for, but with all the mergers, they were disbanded and they felt as though now, what are we going to do? We can't really contribute. And they just kind of unloaded on me with their dissatisfaction. And then I had one donor specifically in the Youngstown area who had served on the board at that Planned Parenthood, and she was very unhappy that she had not been asked to serve on the larger affiliate board once the merger took place. And so she was straightforward, but not rude, but she told me exactly how she felt about that occurring, and that she contributed lots of time. The only time they hear from us now is when we want money. You know, she just gave us she gave me the whole scenario of what was displeasing to her. And so what I found that I needed to do was just listen and ask some pointed questions about her contributions over the years, how she had been involved, what she would like to see going forward, what can I take forward from our conversation to senior management. And then she gave me some recommendations about, you know, how to kind of soothe over the wounds and heal the relationship. But she made it very clear it wasn't going to be automatic and it wasn't going to happen right then and there. And so, yep, that was difficult.
Certainly sounds like it. So thank you for sharing that. I guess what's something that you think has served you well in your past difficult conversations? And I know Shirley's already emphasized just kind of listening to the donor and letting them share kind of their frustrations. I guess if there are any other key tips you could offer those of us who have been through those that did or did not go well? What things should we be keeping in mind in preparation for the next difficult conversation coming our way?
In my instance, I had a similar situation. It was actually with the same merger. I mean, that was, you know, we had the lemons that did not go well, they molded, but then I did have one that turned into lemonade. And I think that the critical part of that conversation was truly just listening. This was a presenting sponsor, and kind of like what Shirley said, they need to vent. And this presenting sponsor was really unhappy. I mean, I had no idea. There had been some things that had happened in the past with the smaller community-based nonprofit, and I was unaware that any of this had transpired. And trying to go in and salvage it was terrifying because it was the presenting sponsor who really needed it. And really, they just needed to vent, and we needed to listen and see what we could do to make it better. and you can't figure out how to make it better unless you're listening to what their biggest issues are. And sometimes they need to be angry first before you get down to what the root of the real problem is. So it's almost like you need to make sure that you go in asking delicately, you know, what is the root cause of the concern? They're very vocal in their frustrations and their anger, but it may take some time to really get down to what the root of the problem is and see if and in this particular case, the root of the problem, what their true frustration was as the presenting sponsor, had been resolved. And we had to get through the 6 canceled appointments because they didn't want to talk. 6 had to get through going around by using other resources to get in the door with them to meet, just due diligence and luck to get in a meeting with this donor, listen to the venting for well over an hour to get to the root problem, address it, say, oh, that's not even an issue anymore, and actually turning it into they doubled what they gave as the presenting sponsor. Because then we had an opportunity to say, okay, so can we present our case now and explain to you what's really going on? And then they were like blown away. Oh my gosh, you know, hopefully this works out, you know, for Daniel. Like, oh, well, now that totally makes sense. Yeah, you should totally do that. So, and that kind of is what happened. They were totally on board and increased their donations, you know, way more than I thought they were going to. And it turned into lemonade. But my key takeaway from all that was just let them vent. You know, you've got to have tough skin and just not take it personally, because it's not personal. They just need to gripe. And then once they get through their griping, you'll get to the issue and you can actually address it then. And hopefully you have the solution.
I think what Dawn said makes a tremendous amount of sense. One question I think to ask at the beginning is, what's my relationship with this person? And if it's a long-standing relationship that's been developed over years, that may put you in a different position than if it's someone you really don't know or don't know well, in which case you may want to think about, is there someone else who can also get involved in the conversation to smooth things out. I think it's harder for us now because we can't go see people. And generally, when things don't go well, I know I want to go and sit beside someone and have a conversation. And in having that conversation, Don, I'm glad you mentioned egos, because I think that's so important also, is just to put aside whether we're right or wrong, because in the end of the day, the donors vote with their feet and they vote with their dollars. And sometimes that may involve eating crow or acknowledging very directly what you could have done differently or what you regret not doing. And that can be really disarming with an angry person who goes like, oh, okay, so you do understand, you do get this. So listening is probably, items 1 through 10 in terms of how to manage these situations.
Ditto. So with the first example, her advice was to work on rebuilding the relationship. And she gave me the names of a couple of other people in the community that she felt could be involved, especially since she wasn't going to be anymore and she was hurt by that. And so what I needed to do was to prove to her that I heard her and reach out to those people and work with them. Spend some time with them. Hopefully they would carry back to her in some conversation, some way that, oh, I'm doing this with Planned Parenthood and we're involved doing whatever the activity would be that they were interested in. And so for me, with her, it came down to hearing what her issue was and then asking her what I could do and then doing to the best that I could, some of what she was suggesting.
Just a follow-up question, more because I'm curious than anything else, Shirley. Did this donor was there an opportunity to invite this person to join the board, or was that an opportunity you had?
Well, I suggested her name. In instances like this, we are outward facing. We take those names back to the head of the organization. I don't know what kind of follow-up there was from the top in terms of an ask to be on the board, but there was a follow-up to mend the fences somewhat, because this had been a former board member before the merger who was very valued. And so as for me, you know, she's still, she'll take emails, and she, you know, but I'm still working on getting her to return as a giver.
Okay. Well, thank you for
Dan, and just thinking, so in thinking about all of these, it just strikes me that organizational change, if it's real, is going to ruffle feathers. It's inevitable. There are people who are attached to what's been as opposed to what's going to be. And identifying who those people are up front and then deciding, well, do I want to give them a heads up along the way, knowing that it might be something that they're very much against, or if this is inevitable, should the chips fall, and then I go back and then I have that conversation with the person. And those are, you know, judgment calls that are really tough. But I think in many of the situations I know I've had, it's because I didn't stop and think through who are the people who could have an adverse reaction to what's being done.
Thank you all for that. I'm going to call a bit of an audible. In any of your experiences, have you had kind of the partnership, whether it is senior executives or even members of your board, kind of to either help steer through this situation, or at least to be able to help kind of be alongside you? I mean, I think Daniel referred to that particularly with when that pointed email that only came to him and the president of the university. There's not really anyone else to go to say, okay, so now what do we do? I know that we've heard this complaint from a major donor. No, I was interested in if there was, if you had more experience of kind of partnering to work through any of these situations.
So I think this is another one that's like such a balancing act, because in the situation I started with about the administrative fee, on one hand, I didn't want him to sit with this anger and discomfort any longer than he had to. On the other hand, I probably would have been better off not responding right away, but roping in a few more colleagues and a few board members and having conversations to get a better sense of what we can do and what we can't do. And in this case, I think there would have been a couple board members who it would have been better for them to circle back to the donor. And, you know, when you hear that after the fact, it's hopefully you learn from it. But so kind of, again, the balance between responding and being really thoughtful in how you respond.
Our situation was unique in that with two organizations merging, you had two development professionals essentially at each organization, and my counterpart left. So I was trying to figure out what was going on. I wasn't familiar with the way that they were doing their development or the donor relations or anything of that, caliber. So when the attitude was kind of like, well, we're just gonna keep it simple and not change anything, we thought we were covered, and it would be okay. And honestly, the executive team was busy, with the merger, with the operations, and the previous CEO, the executive team of the smaller organization really hadn't been involved with donor relations at all. Didn't really have anything to do with it. And that was all on the development person. So when that person left, they were like, I don't normally do that. So just handle it. So board members were really supportive in providing advice, which was really helpful. And I worked closely with one board member that had ties to the volunteer committee and trying to brainstorm to figure out how we were going to address that situation with that volunteer committee. Because I think a lot of that, being this was a very strong team of volunteers, they were influencers and they were making, they were able to influence the donors and the sponsors as well. So working with him to try and rectify that situation helped a little bit.
I want to jump in, Dan. I have a quick question for Daniel and actually the others. Sometimes there's just situations that are untenable to a donor where you have to just all agree to disagree. And I know, Daniel, when I was at the med school, I had a donor, I have no idea how it played out over the ensuing years, whose son was not admitted to the med school. And and I know the development team has no say in who gets admitted and who doesn't. And he was a good donor and said, I will never give you another dime because my son didn't get admitted. And I tried to smooth that over, but I don't know if he ever did or didn't, but sometimes you just have to walk away, I think, and say, I'm sorry, we all disagree. Any thoughts there?
So I like to say that if someone is a child of a board member or a donor, not only will they not get in, but they won't get an interview because it always feels that way. And that really ruffles feathers. And you're right, because we don't influence those decisions very appropriately. So I believe there are probably ways we could manage those things a little more in a donor-friendly manner. And we're constantly having that conversation with our colleges and our admissions people. But you're right. I mean, sometimes it's acknowledging, yeah, I get why you'd be upset. And they may walk away, and that's the consequences of decisions.
I didn't know if you were going to jump in there, Shirley.
In this organization have not had an opportunity or need to work with our board in that capacity. Most of my board interaction from time to time has been support from them for fundraising. So.
Well, thank you all. That's why we covered pretty well already. The other question we had discussed around kind of communicating and fundraising through an organizational crisis, since exciting mergers and endowment policy changes are you certainly didn't plan for them to be a crisis, but they seem to have partially turned into one. So I know we have a question already come in from one of our attendees just around donors historically having access or having direct access to the founder, executive director, whether it's difficult or positive conversations. And they wanted your insight on any advice you'd have for donors that have to settle to have those conversations now with the development director, kind of making them continue to feel valued, but kind of redirect them just because the ED is getting pulled in a million different directions and may not have the time they had 2 years ago to have a 30-minute conversation with every donor that passes by.
So I have a donor who learned of our need to keep a healthcare center closed after we came back from the COVID opening back up. With that situation, out of 19 healthcare centers open in our footprint, we closed 2. Kent temporarily. Kent, of course, is close to a college and the college was closed. And then one in Worcester, patient volume was slow. And so it was an opportunity for us to, just kind of move staff around. And some staff just worked fewer hours. So when we came back, the senior management evaluated, where things stood financially, where things stood in terms of patient traffic. And the decision was made to not reopen the Worcester Healthcare Center. And donors in that area who I had been cultivating, they are kind and generous, and I was really feeling like I was making headway. I had to have those tough conversations with them about before the press release or got into the newspaper that the healthcare center was closing. And it was me, the development person, rather than the VP or the president who talked to those donors. Many of them had been supporters for many years, and so they knew the traffic flow or patient flow or community growth or decrease in that area. And then, others kind of took it a little bit harder than others. And but nobody, with the exception of one donor, insisted on talking to the president. And so what I did in that case was just elevate her concern. Our president did not wind up speaking with her, but communication then came back the other way from the president to the donor. No, I'm wrong. Several conversations I was in the middle, and then eventually the president did talk to her, but it was only after several conversations, and I was the middle person trying to mitigate the concern with the donor. So we did the best we could with me being in the middle.
I just think from my own experience, I think it's always difficult to find yourself, like Shirley was saying, kind of in the middle. There's a donor or another stakeholder that I need to discuss this with the president directly. I don't need to talk to development about it. It's like, well, if the president does not want to talk to that person, and it's very clear, well, oh, I'm not having that conversation, you do it. It's a delicate balance, especially if it is a donor. It's more ideal if it's a donor with whom you've actually worked, since we all know there's some that deal directly with the president. There's some that deal with certain board members because they are friends socially, or they brought them into the organization to a special event or whatever it is. So I think it's, as with all things in fundraising, kind of a delicate balance. You're going to find yourself, hopefully they can understand that there are just so many pulls on that person's time and that of the entire executive team and yourself as a fundraiser, whether you're a department of one or part of a larger team. So it's delicate. It's just what keeps coming back to me. But I also want to open it up to everyone else who's in attendance. If you have any of your own insights to share, it's also helpful to learn from each other.
I'll just add this one other thing, Dan, in that there were several conversations. What she wound up feeling was, these were her words, she just kind of felt like attention was given to her, and she knew that her concern was elevated to the top. And it goes back to what we were saying in the first situation. If people feel listened to, respected, heard, then that goes a long way.
I think it's also important to this demonstrates to me the importance of documentation in whatever your development software is about who the relationship is with. Ultimately, what I've discovered is while as development professionals, we're building a lot of relationships with donors, especially the ones that we've personally kind of onboarded and cultivated. But ultimately, you really want the donor to be tied to the mission and not to the person. But having a documentation of how that relationship started, so we all know how much we transition in this field. Being able to understand kind of where those are and have it documented in your CRM is going to make your life a little bit easier, I think. And then everyone should know if this person is close to the president or doesn't have a relationship to the executive director or is tied to a board member. And then it just makes our jobs a lot easier, I think, in the long run, to have that type of documentation. And that's simple enough to do. Most of the development CRMs have that field where you can kind of see where the relationship has transpired. And I think that's a good tool to use to help us manage that delicate balance.
I wanted to share a story. I had a situation, and it's not with an organization I was paid to serve, but as a volunteer. We were receiving a gift that was probably about 25 or 30% of our entire endowment. So it was a very large gift for this smaller organization. And the donor, midway through all of the conversations, made it very clear that he did not want his gift pulled from his current investment bank, and it was a large commercial bank, and have those funds mixed in with the investment group that we used. And that took me by surprise, and it ultimately got down to kind of a toe-to-toe conversation. It's like, I am not giving this gift if you don't leave it where it is. Now, ethically, he can't make that call. Morally, we wanted the gift. So we negotiated, and ultimately the board made the decision that the commercial bank with whom the donor was involved was completely legit. There was no reason that we couldn't use them. And certainly we have the right to move that gift at some later date. But it was a very tenuous situation with a long-term donor saying, look, these are the terms and conditions of my gift. It's like, ooh, I still feel like it wasn't 100% the best decision, but it was probably 90% the right decision, because ultimately we all won once I kind of backed off and thought, you know what? We can have our assets invested in more than one commercial, a commercial bank. So it was weird.
Thank you for everyone's input on that one. I have another question that came in. I'll also open up to everyone. Is there an appropriate way to say to a donor, kind of, I'm just one person, or that there are kind of capacity limitations when it comes to your time, your mental health, and of course also that of your colleagues and leadership? Don't all jump in at once.
I think it depends on the nature of your relationship. And again, this is why all the time all of us invest in relationship building, is if you have that sort of connection, I think you have the ability to share stuff kind of in a much more, I guess, individualized, personal way, raw way. And you'll work through it together because there's that level of connection. If you don't have it, I find it really personally off-putting if someone puts it off on someone else. Even though I might get that it's ultimately someone else, I want at least the person I'm talking to acknowledge that they're going to act on it, tell someone, do something, not just pass the buck.
Dan, may I share something?
Please.
Okay. Hi. I would just like to also share a situation that hasn't been brought up yet. Excuse me. Because I work for a state institution, a lot of the policies and procedures might be a little bit more strict than a private company. And so the quid pro quo situations are very delicate. I had a major campaign for a building addition, and one of my major donor was livid when he found out that we did not use his company's services during the project. And I'm trying to be very confidential here. And so it got to the point where he didn't want his name anywhere in our new addition. And it got to the point where we brought in our counsel, our attorney, to talk with him, as well as the president. And at no time as a fundraiser did I lead him to believe that we would be using his services. And I think that is so important for we fundraisers to be so careful that we don't lead our donors into believing that we'll use their services. At the same time, I don't know, because this gift was so large, I don't know if I would have brought up at the very beginning, now, we have subcontractors, et cetera, and there's no guarantee that we would use your services. So, because that could have jeopardized the gift as well. So I would like to know, he is still continuing to give, but on a much smaller scale. And he made himself very clear that he was very disappointed in that our subcontractors didn't use their services. And I have no control over the purchasing process and the bringing in subcontractors, et cetera. So it would be interesting if anybody else had a situation like that. Thank you.
Cynthia, in some ways it parallels the kid not getting in or not getting the interview. And I always prefer, of course, hearing this stuff up front, that and then there's an opportunity to both say what you can't do, but also say what you are able to do. And in either case, if you know up front, the ability to say, hey, well, I'll make sure that it gets looked at by the right person, that doesn't fall through the cracks. It's not up to me what the outcome is. There's a state bidding process, but I'll definitely make sure that your proposal gets ample attention, and that people seem to understand that. And again, it's much better than them just getting ignored and being ticked off afterwards.
Thank you.
Another question for the panelists, but really I think all of us logged in today. Question around one-on-one Zoom meetings, especially in lieu of the normal in-person meetings that are the bread and butter of this wonderful field, and that we've all had to adjust to willingly or unwillingly. Have you been taking others from your team along with you kind of for the Zoom calls, or have you been doing them alone? Is it you and your executive director, you and a board member? So just asking kind of what has been other people's approach? I can easily start off. We just had a virtual site visit that was just a Zoom call with one of our major foundation funders. I think it was, I actually did not have to participate in this one. Our CEO, my boss, Chief Development Officer, and I think my colleague, the grant writer, all participated, and I was fine that I did not have to. It didn't need to be half the team and then 2 program officers. So a little bit much. But I really think it depends on, a lot of it goes back to who's been holding that relationship, or if if there's a certain topic that is coming up, if it's an ask versus a cultivation versus stewardship. So it certainly varies. Yeah, I think for me, during this wonderful pandemic, it really has been driven by who needs to be in the room. If the president is there, will they be more likely to be candid or more open or honest about their willingness to give? Then get that person there. If you know they will respond to a challenge from a member of the board that they know well, who will be able to say, "Oh, I've done 15,000 for this, and you should do 15,000 too." If that will make the difference, then you need that board member in the room. But I also want to open it up to everyone else.
Dan, I think that's a great point, that sometimes we have to just pause a few minutes before we respond to a donor, before we do what we think is right, and think about, wait, how could we do this better? And I love the idea of engaging the right board members, or just stepping back and thinking about who else could be at the table in any of these situations that would make things better, because it's easy, partly because it's our job. We just jump in and do the thing, whatever it is. But stepping back and going, wait, who else could come to the table and make this thing, this ask, this situation, this whatever better? That's a really great point.
Well, I'll soon discover, pardon me, how many people can be on a Zoom ask in the next couple of months. Right now, Zoom one-on-one meetings with donors have been kind of kind of iffy. Like, some people aren't really, they think, I think it's because they're thinking, we'll eventually not be in this isolation and I'll meet you face to face. So they're a little reluctant sometimes to try to do a meeting using technology. Now, the longer we're in the situation, donors are becoming a little more comfortable, and so they are willing to have virtual meetings or Zoom one-on-one conversations. But in a couple of months, we'll be raising money for a Toledo renovation, and there will be some engagement beforehand as kind of bringing together some donors as a group. But then beyond that will be myself, and I'll see who else needs to be a part of that when it's time to make those asks. So for me, I'll just have to say, wait and see.
Okay. Any other thoughts from anyone? Otherwise, I will happily open it up for anyone else who has their own questions, whether for our panelists or just for everyone here, since we now have a good group of 39 here with us. So there's plenty more wisdom here in the virtual room with us.
I have a story, if that's okay. I was on a board of an organization several years ago, and we discovered that the treasurer had extorted almost $90,000 from the organization. And of course, you know, we prosecuted her, and Channel 5 News got on top of it, and they just loved the story. Love, 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 love. You know, so it was, you know, we were in crisis mode. So what we did is, you know, we posted on our website, you know, this is what we're doing to make sure this never happens again. And by a year, you know, after about a year, it went away. We did have some tough conversations with donors, and we did explain that, you know, you know, we are putting new things in place. The Ohio Association, OANO, the Ohio Association of Nonprofit Organizations, has some really good criteria for like financial guidelines and governance and everything. And so we put on our website that we implemented those, and that's what we're doing. And then we told any donors who asked, what we were doing. And by a year, it passed off. We didn't have any questions after that. So I guess the moral of the story is be upfront about it. Tell them what you're doing, to fix it. But also, it will go away. Eventually, it will go away. And this doesn't have to mean, the death of your organization if something happens like that. So that's my story.
Well, thank you for the reminder that yes, we all have our crazy situations, but that eventually they will be rectified. Time does move on. Hopefully the donors will feel reassured by the effort you put forward to communicate and reassure that the organization is still worthy of their investments and their time and engagement, and of course their dollars. And any other comments, questions, wild ideas that may have come up, situations you're confronting right now that this may be helping?
Dan, just thinking about what Jackie shared, I think about what I've learned about crisis communications over the years, and I don't know if you guys have ever had a seminar with like Bruce Hennis or someone like that who lives this stuff, but the principles I think apply just as much to individual situations as they do to like notifying a community. And the three principles he always shares are: say it first, say the truth, and say it all. And I just think it makes a lot of sense. And especially if you can get to someone to head off a situation or to keep a situation from even getting more inflamed, you're much better off. I find when in the times where I've kind of stuck my head in the ground and hoped that it would go away, it usually doesn't go away. They often get worse. So kind of just stepping up and really thinking it through and getting the support you need from colleagues or board members, and then just being very direct.
I think it's important to apologize. And sometimes that's really hard for people because you make it personal and it's not. And saying you're sincerely sorry and meaning it, and saying I'm going to do whatever I can to make this, I'm going to do my best to make this right for you. And what is that going to take goes a long way with the donor. My example of turning the lemons into lemonade was exactly what happened. I had nothing to do with the situation. I wasn't even involved with the organization when they got upset. I had nothing to do with it. And I still apologized and said, I'm so sorry. It will never happen again. And this is what we've done, to fix it and correct the situation. That's all they wanted to hear. They just wanted to hear I'm sorry. And when they heard that, the checkbook opened up. They were willing to support again. So a simple apology goes a long way to rectifying donor relations.
Yeah, I feel like I ran into something certainly not as complex as what Dawn was sharing, but dealing with a donor who's in the Summit County area, and on a few different foundation boards, and we were actually in conversation. And her family foundation had made a gift to one of my previous employers, and probably certainly more than a decade before I got there. That's kind of just general. If there was one of the new projects would be of interest. I know you all have if your family foundation specifically has not supported something like this before, and ended up kind of on that's because in 2003 we gave this grant and I don't feel like we were appropriately engaged and stewarded. And wow. Okay. Well, it's been more than a decade. So I'm sorry you had that experience. And just about anyone who was here at that time is no longer employed with the organization. So again, I really apologize that that's the way you felt. And as far as I know, the project tried to bring you up to speed on where I know how that project ended and the impact it has had and kind of what we've built on as that foundation, kind of moving the organization forward. But it was still a bit of a brick wall. I'm still upset from that grant. Okay, you are certainly within your rights to feel that way. We certainly value your continued support on the other foundations that we know you're affiliated with, who have continued to be supportive. So if there is anything else I can kind of offer you, please let me know what that may be. We look forward to seeing you at future events and other things. But yeah, just you all talking kind of reminded me about that one, because I'd happily forgotten it and pushed it into some synapses and things that haven't gotten any blood in a while. So yeah, you have to, I mean, that apology is critical, and I certainly hope, even now that I'm not there anymore, that someone else has kind of picked up, and hopefully they've brought her back around, and that maybe they'll be considering something before we get to the 20-year mark. She hopefully is not still upset with them. So it's sometimes you just don't know, and you have to leave very good documentation. hope that someone can pick up that ball where you left it. I know we're almost at 9:30, but happy to take any more questions people may have. If there isn't one, I know we have a dear friend of our chapter and a very engaged member, Mr. Brian Wrights from the Akron Community Foundation, had an announcement he wanted to share with everybody.
Good morning, everybody. Just wanted to jump on here real quick and make sure that everybody is aware of the Summit County COVID-19 Nonprofit Relief Grant. The application period is now open. We are working to administer $6.5 million from Summit County out to nonprofit organizations servicing basic needs. That includes food and clothing, shelter, health, safety, net services, safe care, and workforce development. If you go onto our website, it describes those a little bit further. We also have a grant for arts and culture organizations. The deadline is next Friday, the 16th. Please do not wait until Friday. I know in my grant writing history, I was one of those guys that oh, I can wait till 11:59 to hit submit. All right, I'll work till 11:58. Please do not do that. Please take a look at it now. It's short, it's quick, it's easy. We want to get this money out. The last thing we want to do is send money back to the federal government. So please take a look at our website, akroncf.org /caresinfo. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out as far as, you know, what might be eligible for reimbursement. Up to 50% can cover your general operating. So that would include things like your salaries, your insurance, rent, utilities. I mean, things that are really hard to get that donor to cover. So up to 50% will cover that. The remaining 50% can be covered for direct services, as well as things that you might need or have spent already to reopen, including PPE, any additional expenses that have been related around COVID. So please hop on to the website, take a look, start your application, and contact us if you have questions. The best way will be to send an email to caresinfo@akroncf.org. just because we are a bit inundated with phone calls. We ask that you send an email so that we have a chance to read and get back to you. But again, the application deadline is Friday, so we want to make sure that you have a chance to take a look at that. You must have a physical location in Summit County because these are based for Summit County residents and employees. So again, if you're headquartered out of the Summit County area, but you do have service address and you're servicing clients here in Summit County, you may be able to be eligible for those funds. So just wanted to end with that and make sure everybody is aware of this opportunity. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian, for bringing that to everyone's attention. Of course, thank you to our wonderful panelists, Daniel, Shirley, and Dawn. We certainly appreciate your own wisdom and some of those hard-won experiences and conversations that make all of us better fundraisers, but may gray a little more of the hair, or in my case, force more of it to fall out. So we appreciate your participation. Be on the lookout. I know Jackie put in the chat, we're going to be sending out an evaluation and, of course, the recording of this exciting meeting. If there's anything you missed, otherwise, we look forward to seeing you. I know next month, Cynthia and the IDEA Committee are going to have a great panel around diversity, specifically reaching out and engaging diverse communities as fundraising professionals. So be on the lookout for that. We hope to see you on that Zoom, and otherwise have a wonderful Thursday, and thanks again.